Marcus Wellington strode across the university campus with the confidence that only comes from generational wealth. His designer clothes, latest smartphone, and sleek sports car made him the center of attention wherever he went. Women flocked to him like moths to a flame, drawn by his charisma and the promise of a luxurious lifestyle. In stark contrast, David Smith walked quietly through the same corridors, his worn textbooks clutched tightly against his chest. His clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, and his shoes had seen better days. Despite his brilliant mind and kind heart, David remained invisible to most of his peers, especially the women who caught his eye. The two unlikely friends had met during their first week of computer science classes. While others dismissed David due to his humble background, Marcus saw something special in the quiet, brilliant student. They formed an odd partnership, Marcus providing financial support when David needed it most, while David helped Marcus understand the complex programming assignments that came naturally to him. "Don't worry about paying me back," Marcus would say whenever David hesitated to accept help. "What are friends for?" But their friendship had an unspoken dynamic. Marcus's generosity came with expectations. When David saved up for months to buy a new jacket, Marcus would admire it so persistently that David felt obligated to let him borrow it, often for weeks at a time. When David got a part-time job and bought his first laptop, Marcus would use it whenever he pleased, claiming his own was too slow for certain tasks. David's heart belonged to Bella, a stunning psychology major with long black hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She was kind to everyone but seemed to look right through David whenever he mustered the courage to approach her. At campus parties, she would laugh at Marcus's jokes and accept his invitations to dance, while David watched from the sidelines, his heart breaking a little more each time. "She's out of your league, man," Marcus would say, not unkindly but with the casual cruelty of someone who had never wanted for anything. "Maybe focus on someone more realistic." As their final semester approached, the two friends found themselves at Tony's Diner, a small restaurant near campus where they often met to discuss their futures. The checkered tablecloth was stained with coffee rings, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on their faces. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. "My father's connections in the tech industry are incredible. I want to start my own IT firm right after graduation." David looked up from his meal, intrigued. "That sounds ambitious. The market's pretty competitive right now." "That's exactly why I need someone I can trust," Marcus continued, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Someone brilliant who understands technology the way I understand business. David, I want you to be my chief operating officer. I'll handle the CEO responsibilities, the investors, the big picture stuff. You'll manage the technical side, the day-to-day operations." David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. We'll be partners, David. Real partners. You'll never have to worry about money again." The promise hung in the air between them like a golden thread connecting their futures. For the first time in years, David allowed himself to dream of a life where he wouldn't have to count every penny, where he could finally feel worthy of someone like Isabella. They shook hands across the table, sealing what David believed was the beginning of their professional partnership. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance that such occasions demand. David threw his cap into the air along with hundreds of other graduates, but his eyes were scanning the crowd for Marcus. They had planned to meet after the ceremony to discuss their business venture, but Marcus was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. David's calls went straight to voicemail. His emails bounced back. It was as if Marcus Wellington had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Years passed, and David threw himself into work with the determination of someone who had been abandoned but refused to give up. He started small, freelancing for local businesses, building websites and managing their IT needs. His reputation grew, and soon he was hiring employees, renting office space, and building what would become Smith Technologies. But even as his success grew, David never stopped looking for Marcus. He hired private investigators, paid for database searches, and followed every lead that promised to reunite him with his old friend. The betrayal hurt, but David convinced himself that something terrible must have happened to Marcus. His friend wouldn't simply disappear without a word. 10 years passed before David's phone rang with the news he had been waiting for. "Mr. Smith, this is Detective Morrison from the firm you hired. We found Marcus Wellington." The address led David to a run-down apartment building in the worst part of the city. The paint was peeling, the windows were barred, and the smell of garbage lingered in the hallway. David climbed 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The man who answered the door was barely recognizable as the confident, well-dressed Marcus Wellington from their university days. His clothes were threadbare, his face gaunt, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. "David." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "I can't believe you found me." They embraced like long-lost brothers, both men fighting back tears. Over coffee in Marcus's sparse apartment, the story slowly emerged. "My parents died in a plane crash 6 months after graduation," Marcus explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was so devastated I couldn't think straight. The funeral, the lawyers, the paperwork. It was all a blur. By the time I surfaced, I discovered that my father had been living beyond his means for years. The bank seized everything, the house, the cars, the business accounts. I was left with nothing but debt." David listened in stunned silence as Marcus continued. "I was too ashamed to contact you. You believed in me, trusted me with your future, and I couldn't even take care of myself. I moved here, took whatever jobs I could find, and tried to rebuild from nothing. But I never forgot about you, David. Not a day went by that I didn't think about our plans, our partnership." The successful CEO looked at his broken friend and made a decision that would change both their lives. "Come work for me," David said simply. "Chief Operating Officer, just like we planned. The position is yours if you want it." Marcus's transformation was remarkable. Clean-shaven, dressed in a sharp suit provided by David, he looked every inch the successful executive he had once been destined to become. David introduced him to the staff as his new COO and closest friend, and Marcus threw himself into the role with grateful enthusiasm. For a while everything seemed perfect. The company thrived under their combined leadership, with David's technical expertise and Marcus's business acumen creating a powerful synergy. They worked late into the night, planning expansions and celebrating victories just like they had dreamed of doing in university. It was during one of their business trips to the airport that fate intervened. David was waiting to pick up a potential investor from Singapore when he spotted a familiar figure walking through the international arrivals gate. Bella looked even more beautiful than she had in university. Her success as a corporate psychologist was evident in her confident stride and expensive clothes. When their eyes met across the crowded terminal, time seemed to stop. "David. David Smith." Isabella's smile was warm and genuine. "I can't believe it's really you." They spent hours catching up over coffee, exchanging stories of their respective journeys. Isabella had built a successful consulting practice, helping companies improve their workplace cultures and employee satisfaction. She was single, having focused on her career, and seemed genuinely interested in David's transformation from the shy student she remembered to the confident CEO he had become. "I have to admit," Isabella said, her cheeks flushing slightly, "I always thought you were special in university. I was just too caught up in superficial things to see it clearly." David felt his heart skip a beat. The girl who had seemed so unattainable was sitting across from him, looking at him with undisguised admiration. They began dating, and their relationship blossomed quickly. Isabella was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed to genuinely care for David. Marcus was thrilled for his friend, joking that David had finally gotten the girl of his dreams. 8 months later, David proposed, and Isabella said yes. Their wedding was a fairy tale affair. Isabella looked stunning in her designer gown, and David couldn't stop smiling as they exchanged vows in front of 200 guests. Marcus served as best man, giving a touching speech about friendship, loyalty, and second chances. For the first few years of marriage, they were blissfully happy. David's company continued to grow, and Isabella's consulting practice flourished. They bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, traveled together, and seemed to have everything they had ever wanted. When Isabella became pregnant, their joy was complete. They flew to the United States for the birth, wanting their son to have American citizenship and access to the best medical care. Little Michael Chen was born healthy and perfect, and they returned home as a family of 3. But something changed after Michael's birth. Isabella, who had always been independent and career-focused, struggled with the demands of motherhood. She felt isolated and overwhelmed, especially when David's work commitments kept him away from home for long hours. "You're never here," Isabella would complain during their increasingly frequent arguments. "I feel like a single mother. Michael needs his father, and I need my husband." David tried to balance his responsibilities, but the company was going through a critical growth phase. New clients, expansion plans, and investor meetings consumed his time and energy. He promised to do better, to be more present, but the demands of his success made it difficult to keep those promises. Their 5th wedding anniversary arrived with little fanfare. Isabella had planned a romantic dinner, but David was distracted by a crisis at work. He tried to be present, to focus on his wife and their celebration, but his mind kept drifting to the problems waiting for him at the office. "I'm sorry," David said, reaching across the table to take Isabella's hand. "I know I've been distant lately. Let's plan a vacation, just the 3 of us. We can go anywhere you want." Isabella's eyes lit up with hope. "Really? You'd take time off work?" "Absolutely. We need this. Our family needs this." They began planning immediately, discussing destinations and activities. For the first time in months, Isabella seemed genuinely happy. They booked a 2-week trip to Italy, arranged for childcare, and David cleared his schedule. But the night before they were supposed to leave, David's phone rang. It was an emergency call from their biggest client in Tokyo. A critical system failure threatened to cost them millions, and they needed David's immediate attention. "I have to go," David said, his face pale with stress. "It's just for a few days. We can postpone the vacation." Isabella's face crumpled. "You promised, David. You looked me in the eye and promised that our family would come first." "I know, but this is different. If we lose this client, we could lose everything. We've already lost everything that matters." The fight that followed was their worst yet. Isabella accused David of caring more about his company than his family, while David argued that everything he did was for their future security. They went to bed angry and woke up as strangers. David left for Tokyo the next morning, and Isabella's goodbye was cold and distant. He spent the next week fixing the client's problems, but when he returned home, he found something had fundamentally changed in his absence. Isabella was different when David returned. She was distant, almost cold, and seemed to find fault with everything he did. She spent increasing amounts of time at the office, consulting with Smith Technologies about improving workplace culture and employee satisfaction. "I think it's wonderful that Isabella is helping us," Marcus said during one of their weekly meetings. "She has such insight into what makes people tick." David was pleased that his wife was taking an interest in the company, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Isabella and Marcus seemed to have developed a close working relationship, spending long hours together discussing organizational psychology and leadership dynamics. The signs were there, but David was too trusting to see them. Late-night text messages that Isabella quickly deleted. Hushed phone conversations that ended when he entered the room. A new distance in their marriage that went beyond their previous arguments. The trap was elaborate and carefully planned. Isabella had convinced David that the company needed better financial oversight, suggesting they bring in an outside auditor. Marcus supported the idea, claiming it would help with their upcoming investor meetings. The auditor they chose was corrupt, paid off by Marcus to plant evidence of financial irregularities. False invoices, phantom employees, and manipulated records painted a picture of systematic embezzlement. When the authorities arrived with a warrant, David was completely blindsided. "This is impossible," David protested as they placed him in handcuffs. "I would never steal from my own company." But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed transfers to offshore accounts in David's name. Invoices bore his signature authorizing payments to non-existent vendors. His own accounting software had been manipulated to hide the theft. As they led him away, David saw Marcus comforting Isabella, his arm around her shoulders as she sobbed dramatically. "I trusted him," she was saying to the reporters who had somehow been tipped off about the arrest. "I can't believe the man I married was capable of this." Prison was a nightmare for David. His wealth and success made him a target, and his genuine bewilderment at his situation made him appear guilty to fellow inmates and guards alike. He spent his days in a cell, trying to understand how his life had fallen apart so completely. Isabella filed for divorce immediately, claiming she couldn't bear to be married to a criminal. She was awarded custody of Michael and a substantial settlement from David's seized assets. Marcus took over as CEO of Smith Technologies, promising to rebuild the company's reputation and restore trust with investors and employees. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. It started with small inconsistencies in the financial records. A former employee, loyal to David, noticed that some of the phantom invoices were dated after David's arrest. A bank teller remembered Marcus making suspicious transfers weeks before the audit began. The real breakthrough came when the corrupt auditor was arrested on an unrelated charge. Facing serious prison time, he decided to cooperate with authorities and revealed the entire conspiracy. Marcus and Isabella had been planning David's downfall for months, using their intimate knowledge of his trust and his company's operations to frame him perfectly. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded phone calls between Marcus and Isabella planning the frame-up. Bank records showing payments to the corrupt auditor. Video surveillance of Marcus planting false evidence in David's office. David's conviction was overturned, and he was released after serving 18 months in prison. Marcus and Isabella were arrested at their wedding reception. Yes, they had married just 3 months after David's conviction, claiming they had found comfort in each other during their shared trauma. The trial was a media sensation. The story of friendship, betrayal, and ultimate justice captivated the public. Marcus and Isabella's defense attorney tried to paint David as a master manipulator who had orchestrated his own frame-up, but the evidence against them was too strong. Marcus received 8 years for fraud and conspiracy. Isabella got 6 years for her role in the scheme. Both were ordered to pay substantial restitution to David and to the company. David reclaimed control of Smith Technologies, but the experience had changed him fundamentally. He was more cautious about trust, more careful about the people he allowed into his inner circle. The company thrived under his leadership, but success felt different now. Less innocent, more hard-won. He never remarried. The betrayal had cut too deep, and he found it difficult to trust anyone completely. He focused on his son Michael, who was allowed to visit him regularly after the truth came out. The boy was confused by everything that had happened, but David was patient, explaining as much as a child could understand about the difference between right and wrong, truth and lies. "Why did Uncle Marcus hurt us?" Michael asked one day, using the title he had been taught to use for David's former friend. "Sometimes people make bad choices," David replied, holding his son close. "But that doesn't mean we should stop believing in good people. We just have to be more careful about who we trust." Years later, when Marcus was released from prison, he tried to contact David. He wrote letters begging for forgiveness, claiming he had been manipulated by Isabella's psychological expertise. David never responded. Some betrayals, he had learned, are too deep to forgive. Isabella was released 2 years before Marcus, but she disappeared from their city immediately. Some said she moved to another state, others claimed she had left the country. David didn't care. He had his son, his company, and hard-won peace. The story of David Smith became a cautionary tale in business schools and psychology textbooks. It illustrated the dangers of blind trust, the complexity of human nature, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. But for David, it was simply a chapter in his life. A painful but valuable lesson about the price of trust and the true meaning of friendship. In the end, David learned that real friendship isn't about what someone can do for you, but about who they are when they think no one is watching. Marcus had failed that test spectacularly, but the experience had taught David to value authentic relationships over convenient ones. The shy, poor student from university had become a successful CEO, but more importantly, he had become a man who understood the true value of integrity, both in himself